got furiously angry and used up each other thus. No sooner did Low realize that the side of his head was crushed in like a dent in a plug hat, than he went after Sandford in the most desperate manner. With one blow of his fist he mashed his nose so far into his face that a cavity was left in its place the size and shape of an ordinary soup bowl. It is scarcely necessary to mention that in making room for so much nose, Governor Stanford's eyes were crowded to such a degree as to cause them to bug out like a grasshopper's. His face was so altered that he scarcely looked like himself at all. I never saw such a murderous expression as Stanford's countenance now assumed. You see, it was so concentrated. It had such a small number of features to spread around over. He let fly one of his battering rams and caved in the other side of Low's head. Ah me, the latter was a ghastly sight to contemplate after that. One of the boys said it looked like a beet which somebody had trod upon. Low was grit, though. He dashed out with his right and stove Stanford's chin clear back even with his ears. What a horrible sight he was, gasping and reaching after his tobacco, which was away back among his under jaw teeth. Stanford was unsettled for a while, but he soon rallied, and watching his chance, aimed a tremendous blow at his favorite mark, which crushed in the rear of Governor Low's head in such a way that the crown thereof projected over his spinal column like a shed. He came up to the scratch like a man, though, and sent one of his ponderous fists crashing through his opponent's ribs and in among his vitals, and instantly afterward he hauled out poor Stanford's left lung and smacked him in the face with it. If I ever saw an angry man in my life, it was Leland Stanford. He fairly raved. He jumped at his old specialty, Governor Low's head. He tore it loose from his body and knocked him down with it. Sensation in the crowd. Staggered by his extraordinary exertion, Governor Stanford reeled, and before he could recover himself, the headless but indomitable Low sprang forward, pulled one of his legs out by the roots, and dealt him a smashing paster over the eye with the end of it. The ever watchful Bill Stewart sallied out to the assistance of his crippled principal with a pair of crutches, and the battle went on again as fiercely as ever. At this stage of the game the battleground was strewn with a sufficiency of human remains to furnish material for the construction of 3 or 4 men of ordinary size, and good sound brains enough to stock a whole country like the one I came from in the noble old state of Missouri. And so dyed were the combatants in their own gore that they looked like shapeless, mutilated, red-shirted firemen. The moment a chance offered, Low grabbed Stanford by the hair of the head, swung him thrice round and round in the air like a lasso, and then slammed him on the ground with such mighty force that he quivered all over, and squirmed painfully, like a worm. And behold, his body, and such of his limbs as he had left, shortly assumed a swollen aspect, like unto those of a rag-doll baby stuffed with sawdust. He rallied again, however, and the 2 desperadoes clinched and never let up until they had minced each other into such insignificant odds and ends that neither was able to distinguish his own remnants from those of his antagonist. It was awful. Bill Stewart and Judge Field issued from their corners and gazed upon the sanguinary reminiscences in silence during several minutes. At the end of that time, having failed to discover that either champion had got the best of the fight, they threw up their sponges simultaneously, and General Wright proclaimed in a loud voice that the battle was drawn. May my ears never again be rent asunder with a burst of sound similar to that which greeted this announcement from the multitudes. Amen. By order of General Wright, baskets were procured, and Bill Stewart and Judge Field proceeded to gather up the fragments of their late principals, while I gathered up my notes and went after my infernal horse, who had slipped his blankets and was foraging among the neighboring children. P.S. Messrs. Editors, I have been the victim of an infamous hoax. I have been imposed upon by that ponderous miscreant, Mr. Frank Lawler of the Lick House. I left my room a moment ago, and the first man I met on the stairs was Governor Stanford, alive and well, and as free from mutilation as you or I. I was speechless. Before I reached the street I actually met Governor Low also, with his own head on his own shoulders, his limbs intact, his inner mechanism in its proper place, and his cheeks blooming with gorgeous robustitude. I was amazed. But a word of explanation from him convinced me that I had been swindled by Mr. Lawler with a detailed account of a fight which had never occurred, and was never likely to occur. That I had believed him so implicitly as to sit down and write it out, as other reporters have done before me, in language calculated to deceive the public into conviction that I was present at it myself, and to establish it with a string of falsehoods intended to render that deception as plausible as possible. I ruminated upon my singular position for many minutes, arrived at no conclusion. That is to say, no satisfactory conclusion, except that Lawler was an accomplished knave, and I was a consummate ass. I had suspected the first before, though, and been acquainted with the latter fact for nearly a quarter of a century. In conclusion, permit me to apologize in the most abject manner to the present Governor of California, to the Honorable Mr. Low, the Governor elect, to Judge Field, and to the Honorable William M. Stewart, for the great wrong which my natural imbecility has impelled me to do them in penning and publishing the foregoing sanguinary absurdity. If it were to do over again, I don't really know that I would do it. It is not possible for me to say how I ever managed to believe that refined and educated gentlemen like these could stoop to engage in the loathsome and degrading pastime of prize fighting. It was just Lawler's work, you understand, the lubberly, swelled up effigy of a 9 days drowned man. But I shall get even with him for this. The only excuse he offers is that he got the story from John B. Winters, and though of course it must be just so, as if a future congressman for the state of Washoe could by any possibility tell the truth. Do you know that if either of these miserable scoundrels were to cross my path while I am in this mood, I would scalp him in a minute? That's me. That's my style. End of The Great Prize Fight by Mark Twain.